we had good doctors here. We had two good schools, our high school and our Dayton City School, which was from the 1st through the 8th grade, had good teachers there. Had quite a few merchants in town. We had 2 bottling works here. We had a lumber mill. We had a hosier mill. We had a coal and ice plant. I was born on 3rd Avenue, right across from the courthouse. My father worked for Dayton Coal and Iron Company in the office over there. And of course in 1913, I was born in 1912, 1913 he was without a job. So a few years after that, in 1917, he did have work here. But in 1917 we went into North Carolina, and he worked up there with Aluminum Supply Company when they built those power dams in the Great Smoky Mountains. Then we came back to Dayton, and I lived on 4th Avenue just over from the courthouse. I walked through the courthouse every day that I went to Dayton City School because it was a shortcut through the alley. Every time I went to town, I walked through the courthouse, and every day of the trial, I was in the courthouse yard. There were such crowds there. See, all the people couldn't get into the courtroom. So they had speakers on the lawn, and just thousands of people came into town every day. And the yard, there wasn't much we could do except go through the yard. Well, the first time I heard about the trial was in May. My brother Crawford, who was on the coach's football team, was over on the high school tennis court playing tennis with 2 of his football friends and his coach, John T. Scopes. And a young fella came over and called Scopes aside and told him that there was a group of men uptown and they wanted to talk to him. So he left the court and went over there and was gone for some time. And when he came back, he told the boys that he had just agreed to be arrested. So that night, my brother, when we were at dinner, well, he and Dad were discussing what had happened. See, my father had been in town and all, and he had heard of it. And then Crawford heard this from him. So they discussed it. Well, that's the first time that I had heard anything about evolution. I had no history or science or anything, even though up until I was in the 8th grade, in grade school then. So I didn't really know what they were talking about, so I got my edification that night. I had been brought up in the church in a religious family all my life, and I believed the story of the Bible. Lots of times I wondered how in the world some of the things could have happened, but nevertheless I believed it. Evolution didn't mean a thing to me, didn't disturb us, and the thought of them coming and doing that didn't disturb my parents. They told him what they would like to do, and would he go along with it? That's the story, you know, you've read that over and over. And he just said, why, yes, he was accommodating. He was a nice fellow. And he said he would do it. He didn't know what he's getting into. The people in Dayton were not excited over the evolution trial at all, other than they felt it was kind of an insult, you know, because it was more or less a religious town. And I didn't know of any infidels here. There might have been some, and there might have been people that weren't really religious, you know, but I have a lot of church people here. It didn't bother them too much. Yeah. You know, they didn't believe a word of it. And then on the other hand, they knew that he had not taught it over there. Mm-hmm. See, that's the one thing. It didn't upset Dayton. But what Dayton did was once they decided to do it, was get ready for it. It's a small town. At first they thought it would be a little thing. until they heard that William Jennings Bryan would be here and Clarence Darrow would be here. And I'm sure they knew that that would bring in an influx of people. Well, I knew Scopes real well. He was in my home. He lived right down the street from me, the end of the street from me, and I saw him all the time. I did go to the football games because my brother was playing,
so
you know.
He was a family friend.
He and my brother were real close, you know, friendly. Sure. He ran around more with these football boys than he did anyone else. The extent of their running around mostly was maybe meeting down at either Rogers or one of the drugstores, Mr. Earl's drugstore somewhere, sitting around drinking Cokes and chatting at night.
Did you happen to also see William Jennings Bryan? Did you?
Oh yes, I saw him. The first Sunday he was here, he delivered the morning service in our church, and I sat right in the front seat, right in front of him. And he delivered the sermon that day, and a large crowd there. And then he was also in our church the day he died. After the trial that Sunday morning, I understand that he had been in Chattanooga and didn't come back up to Dayton until that morning. But he appeared in our church, and I know the pastor wasn't expecting him. He didn't know that he was going to be present, and he took a seat right over across from me in the church. And he requested 2 songs. Oh, Brother Charlie Jones called on him for prayer, and he led in prayer, and then he requested 2 songs be sung that day. And then he went home and had lunch, and about middle afternoon we got the news that he had expired. Well, I knew who William Jennings Bryan was when they said he was coming here. I knew who he was, even though I was a youngster, because his name had been mentioned many times in my family. My mother was a great admirer of him because of his religious beliefs, and my father that too, but because of his political beliefs. My father was a real Democrat. He knew all the local Democrats and saw that big heads from Washington or Nashville or wherever, and talked about them so that we would know who they were. But he saw that we would meet everybody from Nashville. I knew all of those. I knew Judge Ralston when he came here. I knew who he was. I had met him because he was a friend of my father's. And I knew Stewart. I knew him too, because see, they would come to Dayton, both of them, and Daddy would see them. And if we passed by anywhere, or he would tell us they were going to be in town, he wanted us to come by and he wanted us to meet them. So I knew both of them when they came here. And of course I didn't know, I just knew who Bryan was and who Darrow was. Well, I respected Darrow as being a very fine defensive attorney, because I had read all about him in the newspaper. I read every bit that came out about that trial, because it was such a horrible thing. So I had respect for the man, you know, and was anxious to see him and all of that, just like I was Bryan. I saw that trial, every bit of it. I was sitting right on the front seat on the hard bench there through every bit of it, and just gritting my teeth. And I despised Darrow every time he spoke. And you know, most of the people out there did. You could hear the groans and so on. And this is true, the best of my memory, because we talked about it, you know, back then. Nobody applauded Darrow when he was attacking Brian, questioning, I call it attacks. If you had seen it, you would have too.
Yeah.
Because he just acted it all out. Jumping around there like a monkey on that stage. He was an actor too. And he emphasized every little mean thing that he did. Brian was taller, held himself upright, you know, and made a great impression. And Darrell was smaller and a little hunched, you know, in his carriage when he walked about, and then especially when he talked up there. Now that was the only day I was in his presence, so I would see him. I'd be in the courtyard and I would see them coming and going, and they would come out of court, you know, and then they would stop in little groups and talk a little while, you know, and move on and all, but I was never in his presence. Like I got to shake William Jennings Bryan's hand that day in church because I pushed right up front so I could do it. But anyway, that day he would he'd get right up in his face and snap those red suspenders. And I think I could truthfully say that many people in Dayton were offended over. Now, of course, I was just a child, you know, and at that time, I certainly wasn't thinking about the fact that he was an attorney and they're doing his thing.
Yes.
All I could think about was that he was assaulting Brian, and Brian is sitting there in the heat of the day with that big fan, fanning away and sweating and wiping sweat and being insulted over and over. And I know I was sitting there twisting and turning and mad as I could be. We're outside and there are benches everywhere and a huge crowd, and of course the crowd didn't have seats. A lot of them, you know, were just standing around and everything. That about 10,000 people were gathered in Dayton. Now whether they were around there or not, just a big, big crowd, you know. A lot of the newsmen, and Mencken was one of them, and I'm not sure about Pegler, they weren't even there that afternoon. And they had to get there. Of course, it turned out to be quite a thing, you know.
Sure.
And they hadn't thought much about it. This is the story I heard way back then, you know. And so they were out of town, gone to Chattanooga, you know, and had to get their stories from someone else. He was tough on Tennessee, yes. Tennessee, he said some mighty ugly things about the state of Tennessee, about how ignorant we were, uneducated, and so on. The letters that he wrote to his sweetheart while he was here in Dayton, and he talks about Dayton, how hot it was, and about our meals and all the different things. But he says, as he gets on over there, he says he finally got to where he liked our food.
Oh. You knew Judge Ralston, you had met him.
Yes, I knew who he was. Now, when he came back here, he probably didn't know who I was, but I had met him over in the courthouse yard on an occasion when he was here, and that's how I met Stewart, too. The thing that stands out most in my mind was that afternoon when Dara got up there and talked to William Jennings Bryan the way he did. And I believe it was Stewart. He was called down so many times, but when Stewart said, "Now look here, this is my," words to this effect, I'm not quoting him, "this is my job to keep you in order, and you are asking him questions that have nothing to do with the issue of this trial, and I want you to stop it." And William Jennings Bryan said something to this effect: "Let him ask anything that he wants to. He came in here to do this thing, attack the Bible. And he can ask me any question he wants to, and I'll answer it. But you know, the judge stopped it anyway. It was that bad. Now, you know it had to be bad for them to, you can't imagine just by me talking about it. And there might be other people that admired Dara. I know there were, like those reporters that said that Dara made a fool out of Brian. Well, you can see in my eye who he made a fool of. He made a fool of himself, prancing around there like a monkey. Said he made not a fool, made a monkey out of him. He made a monkey out of himself. He just pranced around there just exactly like a monkey.
If tomorrow all the things were gone I worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, I'd thank my lucky stars to be living here today.
'Cause this flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. Proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea,
From Detroit down to Houston,